Good
All
morning,
right.
everyone. How are you all? We're so excited to see you this morning and to have you join us for this series in partnership with Braver Angels on Bridging Divides. My name is Erica Manuel. I am the CEO and Executive Director of the Institute for Local Government. And what can we say is this is a really great time to be hosting today's webinar and series. If those of you that were part of or around our election yesterday, you know that there is still a lot of activity happening, and we're so grateful you chose to join us this morning after. We hope that you were successful with your campaigns if you had them, and if you supported others, we hope that they were successful as well. And we're just grateful for those of you that are public servants in particular, given that it's so important the work that's being done, particularly at the local level. Certainly, it's a passion of ILG that we continue to support all the foundational democratic processes, and our elections and our primaries are so much a part of that. So today's session is following our very successful session on bridging divides and kind of tools for bridging the divide. And today we're going to talk about depolarizing within. And if you were part of our session last time, you might have experienced the interactivity of that workshop. And it's a really different than what some of our other ILG webinars have been, which are a little bit more kind of passive. These are very engaging, very interactive. And so we did have a number of notes in the promotional materials for this, talking just about how you should be prepared to be in the space and certainly to practice the skills, right, for how we're going to do this moving forward. So this is a little bit of a different session for us, and so we do want to give a disclaimer that it's a very active session. There will be breakout groups. You will be practicing some of the tips and tools that we're training you on, and so we do want you to be prepared for that. We want to acknowledge the craziness and busyness of your professional roles, and so if you find that you cannot participate in a breakout session, we hope that you drop off of the line instead of kind of being not present, right? So a lot of times people will just turn their camera off and do something else. Doesn't work great for this session. So we want to make sure that you know that in advance so you can get the most out of it today. That being said, we will be recording parts of this session, not the breakout session, but the other portions of it. So if you did need to drop off, you could come back and see what you missed, though you wouldn't be able to practice. And we'll go over this again later. So quickly, while everyone is getting logged in, just a couple things about ILG if you're not familiar with us. We are nonprofit, nonpartisan, and we are here to help local governments. Our goal is to think about all of the complexity that local government is facing and figure out how we can help you navigate that complexity. Whether you are staff, whether you are elected officials, regardless, we know that you have very tough jobs. ILG is here to help you, and if you are part of one of those 2,500 or more local governments at the city, county, or special district level, we want to help you get through some of those sticky situations. The next slide talks about our programs and services, leadership and governance, civics education and workforce, public engagement, sustainable and resilient communities. Those are just some of the topics that we know are really, really difficult as you're trying to navigate your roles. And so we offer services and certainly counseling in those areas. And this conversation today really falls under the leadership and governance area. We have heard that this is a really challenging topic for you all, and it's growing in complexity, and certainly it's been something that has, I think, increased over time, particularly in the last 4 to 6 years. The next slide speaks to really a survey that we did recently of local government leaders, and over 64% of them said that they're struggling with understanding implicit bias, talking about equity, and navigating difficult conversation. And our partnership with Braver Angels really came out of that need, thinking about how are we going to continue to do our jobs well, continue to do our jobs through the lens of equity, but also thinking about how do we navigate the complexity of conversations, of bridging divides, of making sure that people are treated fairly, treated certainly with the respect they deserve, but also that we're able to talk about politics, and we're able to really talk about policy and issues that matter and do it in a productive way. And so that's what this conversation today is about. That's what these workshops are about. And practicing those skills is a big part of what we want you all to learn from this partnership between ILG and Braver Angels. So I'm so excited to be co-hosting this webinar with our Braver Angels team. We have a number of team members from Braver Angels on the line to help moderate this webinar. And I'm going to start with Randy. Randy, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Erica. And we are really excited to be presenting this workshop. The Depolarizing Within online workshop. And so I just wanted to mention the musical introduction that we had. So that was specially selected for this workshop. We've got a whole music community of artists who donate their time and their usage of their work to support the Braver Angels mission. And we're going to hear another selection today when we do our evaluation. And so we're excited to be able to present those to you. So as a quick note, we are recording the session to make it available to you later. The recording won't include your breakout session, so you can speak freely, and we want you to be fully participating in those breakout sessions. And this is the live practice session of a workshop that often starts with an e-learning course. And so hopefully many of you did complete that e-learning course before this. If you didn't, that is okay. We are going to review some of the areas there so you have time to take that in. And so you'll still be able to get a lot out of this course. And we definitely encourage you, once again, to be interactive, right? If you do not have the time to really put your focus on this course, then we would encourage you to come back to another Depolarizing Within session. We can certainly help you to find one. There are Depolarizing Within sessions that are run around the country, and they often welcome folks from other areas, so you should be able to join, or you can watch the recording, of course. And so the participant guide is in the chat box in case you don't have it handy in front of you right now. And so we definitely encourage you to look at part 1 of that participant guide to get ready for the self-reflection that's coming up. All right. So my name is Randy. I'm director of events for Braver Angels, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. But there's a whole team of staff members that are helping out. So I want to introduce them and let them introduce themselves. So Martin is our breakout room manager, and he's responsible for dividing you up into our breakout groups when we do our practice session. So he's really instrumental to this. So Martin, please go ahead and say hi.
Hi, have a great workshop, everyone.
All right. Liz is our participant manager, and she's enabled you to join the call from the waiting room. She'll also be keeping an eye out for raised hands, helping to keep time, things like that. And if you have any questions about the workshop, Liz is a great person to ask. So Liz, go ahead and say hi.
Hi, everyone. Have a great learning experience this morning. And also, I want to remind you to keep yourselves muted unless you're actually ready to say something, because I've already had to remute a couple of people. Thank you.
There you go. And so if you do have questions about the workshop you want to ask Liz, you can go ahead and chat to her. And then Erica is also going to put her cell phone number in the chat box. So if you have any technical difficulties during the call, if you get knocked off and can't get back in or something like that, you can call her cell phone number. You might want to write that down. You could call her or text her. You can also chat her if you're still on the call and you're having any technical issues. And so with that, let's get started. So where do you start depolarizing, right? The natural inclination is to jump right in and try to start depolarizing the interaction between opposite political orientations, or, as we say, reds and blues, right? And, this is a complex interaction, and Braver Angels has our workshop. Many of you were at the Skills for Bridging the Divide workshop that dealt with those interactions. But today, we're going to start with perhaps a surprising source of depolarization ourselves. Okay, as a surprising amount of today's environment of toxic polarization is driven by how we talk with like-minded people about people on the other side. Right, so we become agents of polarization when we use any of the 4 horsemen of polarization. Okay, so those are stereotyping, dismissing, ridiculing, and exhibiting contempt. Okay, these offer us artificial unity, right? Only smart people like you and me know what the country needs. It's an outrage machine. There those crazy people go again. And it also offers us the illusion that vanquishing the other side is going to lead to a political promised land, right? So as we retreat into our political silos, people on the other side become not just strangers, but enemies, right? How do we talk among ourselves about them fuels the fire that threatens our democracy. And what if we learn the discipline of non-polarizing attitudes and words about the political other, with whom we do share a national past and a future, right? So this takes us to our workshop goals. First, we'll start with what we're trying to accomplish here. Okay, so the goals of this workshop are becoming more aware of our own inner polarizer and ways to actually counteract that. Secondly, we'll be practicing the skills for being critical without stereotyping, dismissing, ridiculing, or using contempt. And then we're going to practice the skills for intervening in a constructive way in social conversations that veer into contempt and ridicule for people who hold other political views. All right. And we do want you to keep in mind, when we talk about polarization, we're not referring to the sharp disagreements on issues and philosophy, right? That is healthy in a democracy. We're talking about how we regard and talk about large groups of ordinary people on the other political side. All right. So let's take a look at the agenda that we'll be using for today. Okay, so first you'll have a chance to reflect on what you learned about yourself from the e-learning course, or we're also going to give you time if you didn't have a chance to review that course, to review some of the statements that or some of the questions that we want you to focus on. So you'll be able to do that both on your own and with a partner. Then we'll talk about how to intervene in polarizing conversations with like-minded people. Right, so you'll have a chance to practice the LAP skills. So the LAP is our framework for depolarizing that you may have learned in the e-learning course. And you'll also have a chance to practice the pushback skills that you're likely to need when you are in these conversations, because you are likely to run into that pushback, and we want you to be prepared. And finally, we'll discuss long-term perspectives and wrap up with a checkout question. All right. So let's get into it. We're going to start today's session by reflecting a little on what you might have learned about yourself from the online course that you reviewed. Okay, we realized that some people in this workshop weren't able to complete the course prior to it, so we're going to allow you to review that exercise and give you enough time to really reflect on it. So the participant guide is going to help you to think about the material that was covered in that course. If you don't have it on the screen, it is in the chat, so you can go ahead and click on that. And you also might want to have a method to take notes, right? So it could be a pen or paper, it could be a device or maybe a program on your computer. It's a good idea just to be able to take notes somewhere, so you can write out your responses to the prompts that we're going to give you. Okay, so let's get to the inner polarizer question. So I'm going to give you a minute to look over these questions and focus on the self-assessment. And I'm actually gonna read these one by one, and I want you to really consider them as we go. Okay. So let me just make this a little bit bigger for myself. Okay. So so the same questions are on the screen and in your participant guide. All right. So the first one is, how often do I find myself thinking about those people on the other political side without much regard for the variation among them? The second one, how often do I find myself assigning mainly self-serving or negative motivations to the other group and mainly positive motivations to my group? Third one, how often do I find myself focusing on the most extreme or outrageous ideas and people on the other side, thereby making it hard to see how a reasonable person could remain in that group? Fourth one, how often do I find myself comparing the worst people on the other side with the best people on my side? Fifth question, how often do I feel a rush of pleasure with friends when we ridicule those crazies on the other political side? And then finally, which of the following is closest to my overall emotional attitude towards the majority of people who support the other side? Is it hate, that they're enemies who are out to destroy the country? Is it disdain, that they are ignorant and should know better? Is it pity, they're well-meaning, but they've been duped? Is it a basic respect? They make contributions even if they are mostly off base. Or is it respect and appreciation? They make unique and necessary contributions. Okay, so hopefully you've had a good chance to reflect on these questions And what we're going to be doing is putting you into breakouts now. Okay, so as a reminder, the items to discuss in the breakouts, you can introduce yourself, but really I want you to focus on what you learned from the e-learning course. And before we go into our rooms, we want to give you some general guidelines for every breakout. Okay, so we're going to have I believe 4 of these over the course of the workshop. And so this first time the breakout, give your name, where you live, and then you could definitely share one revealing surprise from your self-assessment. We think that would be a great way to go. And then take turns addressing the question, and no crosstalk. Okay? We need someone to mute themselves. No crosstalk. Make sure that everyone gets a chance to talk. All right. So we don't want you interrupting others when they're talking, and we definitely want you to allocate your time equitably. All right. And use any remaining time after you've all had a chance to speak to discuss the commonalities and differences in your responses, because we're going to be asking you to read the responses that you would actually say in these conversations. Okay, so this is a time for sharing, but not to come to consensus. Okay, we don't all have to agree that we take the same approach, but we want to understand what others' approaches are. And it would be great for you to alternate your order of speaking as you go through the workshop. So different people get a chance to start, because it might be difficult to manage the time fully. Right. So does anybody have any questions about what you're going to do in the breakouts before we head into this first breakout? This is another look at what you're going to be doing in the breakouts. We're going to divide you into 3 or 4 participants in each room, and also note, this workshop does not separate reds and blues into separate breakouts. Okay, everybody's going to be together regardless of their political orientation, and we, our workshops offer space for different political perspectives. So don't assume that everyone in your breakout group shares your political orientation. Okay, so you're going to have 5 minutes to introduce yourselves and share what you learned about yourself from the polarizing questions and strategies. And so the basic instructions are going to be in the chat box, and that'll still be there for you in the chat when you go into the breakouts. Time's going to go quickly. We'll send you a message when it is halfway through. So yeah, any questions before we head into the breakouts? And you can raise your Zoom hand if you do have any questions. Okay, I don't see any, so I'm gonna give Martin the go-ahead to send them in. So hopefully you had great breakout room conversations. We'd love to hear from some people who are willing to share their learnings with the whole group. So you can hit your raise hand button, and we will call on you. And just remember that you'll have to unmute yourself. But what did you learn about your inner polarizer and the strategies that you can use to counter it? So anybody want to share what you learned about yourself from this exercise? And if it was just the questions that we reviewed right before the breakout, right, and you kind of learned something just about your answers, that would be great to hear as well. So Roberta, please go ahead, or Bobby, if you'd like me to call you that. What did you learn about yourself?
Actually, I learned something about one of my people that was in our group, that she had mentioned she had views one way and she's moved to another location. And in the last 6 years, her views have changed. So I think your social group and your community can change your views on a lot of things. And for me, I never really thought about that, because I've lived in pretty much the same area for a long time.
Yeah, that is a great point. I've definitely experienced, changing views. Certainly my involvement with Braver Angels has expanded the viewpoints that I have access to, right? And so it's definitely led me to reconsider some things that I just assumed were true because of the environment that I grew up in and the people who I surrounded myself with. So I think that's a fantastic point to really keep in mind, especially when we're in those same environments that reinforce our views and make it seem like that's the only rational view to have. It's definitely very dependent on where you are and who you surround yourself with. Thanks very much, Bobby. Anyone else want to make a comment about something that they learned about themselves from this self-assessment? We really encourage you to be reflective and vulnerable with this. Anyone else have any comments that they would like to make? Okay. All right. Well, now that we have kind of looked inward, what we'd like to do is to focus on depolarizing conversations with like-minded people. All right. Let me get my screen out of the way. Here we go. Okay. So we're going to briefly review the skills for intervening in conversations when they veer into those 4 horsemen that we talked about: the stereotyping, dismissing, ridicule, and contempt. And keep in mind, these are situations with people that you largely agree with politically, right? So it's best to try this out in one-to-one conversations, similarly to how we suggested that you try out the skills for bridging the divide last time, okay? And be extra careful using these online, right? So when you want to practice them, you shouldn't necessarily go to Facebook or Twitter first to try using them in the real world, since it's much harder to control the tone, especially because of all the people who are chiming in, right? So just keep that in mind. And there are some other mistakes that we suggest that you try to avoid. There's 4 mistakes that I want to mention, lest you be expelled from your own group or accused of disloyalty or naivete, things like that. So first of all, coming across as judgmental or more enlightened, right? So this could sound like, well, you're stereotyping others, something I myself am trying not to do, right? You can certainly have that as your goal, but announcing it to the world and saying that you are, suggesting you're superior because of it is not really a very effective way to go. Coming across as defensive for the other side. So for example, why are you being so nasty to them, right? That's not necessarily going to help you to strengthen your connection to the person that you're talking to. And coming across as contemptuous of both sides, right? Being cynical is not in and of itself depolarizing, right? So saying things like all politicians are liars is not really getting us where we need to be in this conversation, right? And then finally, getting caught up in defending particular leaders or fringe groups, right? Focus on what is being said about the broad swath of people on the other side, right? So for example, so-and-so is totally misunderstood. He was just joking, but people don't get it, right? That's not going to win you a lot of points, right? And so we really want to focus on those common issues like stereotyping, like contempt. And so we really want you to try to maintain that focus as you're practicing these skills. All right, so the acronym that you may have learned from the online course is LAPP, and that stands for Listen, Acknowledge, Pivot, and Offer a Perspective. They're actually named for David Lapp, who's one of the co-founders of Braver Angels. You can turn to page 4 of your handout and follow along, okay? So the first one is listen. Listen for the other person's values and emotions influencing the stereotyping, ridicule, contempt. Often it's from frustration, fear, worry for the country or groups in the country, or personal experiences of being put down by people on the other side, right? When there are strong emotions, there's often a deeper story there, right? So we want you to acknowledge what you're hearing and agree with whatever you can, okay? Usually the position or concern being shared, right? While avoiding agreeing with the stereotyping of people on the other side, okay? So that's a distinction that we really want you to focus on. And then we would then like you to pivot, okay? So after listening and acknowledging for a while, signal a shift in your part of the conversation, right? Pivoting offers a context for why you're introducing another perspective. We would definitely encourage you to be personal here, right? So you may recognize some of these from skills for bridging the divide. We want you to make a personal connection, right? So I statements are very useful. So after another, I'm with you on, right? Say something about yourself that leads you to offer another perspective. You might say, I'm beginning to see our differences with conservatives or liberals differently. Can I share some of these views? And then pivoting is a way to signal that you're about to shift the conversation, like using a turn signal before you change lanes, right? Asking for permission to go down a different path is one way to pivot. And then once you've pivoted, you can offer your perspective. And that will hopefully be a depolarizing viewpoint, right? So, and your participant guide has some examples of perspective comments, and we'll go over those. Okay, so that's the overall framework that we're going to be using for today, right? And while you're using these skills, you shouldn't be surprised when your conversation partner pushes back on your perspective, right? So you're likely to hear things like, yes, but, or wait a minute, are you defending so-and-so, right? So we want you to be aware of that, be prepared for it. You also may have to go through multiple rounds of lap skills before the other person is able or willing to hear your depolarizing perspective. Okay, you may also have to reassure the person that you are indeed a true conservative or liberal, if that's the case, right? And that you share many of their common values and concerns, right? And if you sense no openness to your depolarizing perspective, well, you can summarize it one more time and then move on, right? If you escalate, you may start polarizing with this person and undermining your message. Okay, so at this point, we want to give people a really quick stretch break. All right, so now we're going to practice using those lap skills. Okay, so for this practice, I'm going to play the role of polarizer, and you're going to have a chance to try out the depolarizing skills. Okay, so when I make polarizing comments, your job is going to be to write down the exact words that you would use to respond to me. Okay, that's why I suggest you have something to take notes with. We'll do this with each of these, the lap skills, first for listening knowledge, then pivot, and then offering a perspective, okay? And we would love for you to keep your responses to a sentence or two for our purposes today, right? You'll share those statements and how you think they'll accomplish what they're meant to with your partners in the breakout room, all right? And then we'll discuss it in the larger group. So the practice topic is actually going to be the size and regulatory powers of the federal government, right? Blues tend to favor a more activist federal government in scope and regulatory authority. Reds certainly tend to favor a more limited role for the federal government and emphasize the downside of regulation, right? These are pretty familiar kind of lines of demarcation. And each side is subjected to disparaging stereotypes on these issues, right? Of course, we've heard a lot of these stereotypes. So before we practice the lap skills, I'd love to do just a whole group discussion on some of these stereotypes. Does anyone have any thoughts about some of those stereotypes that we've heard about? First of all, I want to see if anyone has thoughts about what are some of the stereotypes that blues have about reds when it comes to limited government. Does anyone have a thought about some of those stereotypes that people invoke in these conversations? If you want to go ahead and raise your hand. If you can't find your raise hand button, we would love you to click that. But you can actually just wave. Oh, Sherry, go ahead and unmute. And what are some of the stereotypes that blues have about reds when it comes to limited government?
That Reds want the government when they need them, but otherwise they don't appreciate the government helping others.
Yeah, I've definitely heard things like that. Yeah, anything else that anybody else wants to add about stereotypes that blues have about Reds? Because next, oh, Erica. Oh no, that's a different Erica. So I see someone with their hand raised, and actually, if you could unmute, tell us your name, and maybe we can help to relabel you.
I'm hoping, yeah, I lost connection. I had to come back in. My name is Ava de Lara.
Okay, are you able to change your name yourself?
I actually can't even find me.
Oh, Ava.
Yeah,
okay,
I
there we go.
just changed your name the way it sounded, but that might not be the right spelling.
You know what? Close enough.
I'm happy to rename it too, though, Ava.
Oh, it's just a slight, it would just be a slight, you know, the L is capitalized. So
Oh, then I was
that's what I
close.
mean.
I can do
think
that.
that's-
No problem.
Yes. So you know, so you did a great job. Thank you very
Okay.
much. I was just
So,
going to
so
say,
what are the stereotypes that you've heard the Blues have about Reds when it comes to limited government?
um, they only want to help corporations.
Yeah, certainly heard that. Absolutely. Okay, so let's go the other way. What are the Red stereotypes that that they have about Blues when it comes to a more expansive government role? Anybody have a thought about? And Ava, I see your hand up again. If you wanted to mention a stereotype for that, go ahead and unmute. Or if anyone
Tax and
else,
spend.
actually, yeah. What's that? Tax and spend?
Tax and spend.
Certainly, that's a phrase we hear a lot. Sarah, go ahead and unmute. What are the stereotypes that you've heard?
That they just want their fingers in every aspect of your life.
Absolutely, yeah. These are definitely really common stereotypes that I think we've all come across, right? And if you lean red or lean blue, I think you probably feel like this is unfair, right? And so it's really important to recognize that those stereotypes are oversimplifications, if they even have, you know, a root in some kernel of truth there, right? So, so now we want to show you the instructions for the practice that we're going to be doing. So I'll share again, and we're going to be starting with the blue side. I'm going to give you an example of what a polarized blue might say about Reds who favor limited government. Then I'll do the same for a polarized red and what they might say about Blues. So if you're a blue and mainly want to practice how to respond to fellow Blues when they are disparaging Reds, then write down responses to what I say is the blue polarizer, okay? And same for Reds. If you want to practice responding to fellow Reds, respond to what I say as the red polarizer, okay? If you want to double your practice opportunities, feel free to respond to both, okay? And so we're going to start with listening and acknowledgement. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm going to start with a blue polarizer speaking to Blues. Okay, so this is what that would sound like. You know, conservatives say they're for limited government, but what they really want is for the rich to get richer. And the best way to do that is to take from the poor and the working class people. They believe in a society of winners and losers, with the winners deserving most of the pie and the losers being blamed for their own misfortune, even though the winners usually start out with lots of advantages. Reds are basically heartless about the poor and would strip away the social safety net if they could get away with it. What amazes me is how many Americans get duped by this conservative approach to government. All right, so that was the blue polarizer talking to another blue. All right, so if you want to try out the listen and acknowledge skills of the blue polarizer, write down a brief acknowledgement statement, okay? Something that says, you hear me and agree with some part of my concern, okay? So write down word for word what you'd say to me, and it's important that it be the actual words that you would use in a conversation. All right, focus on what you agree with and what you share in common with the speaker, but don't start to offer a depolarizer perspective at this point, okay? Just acknowledge. So any questions about what I'm asking you to do? Okay, great. Right, so now I'm going to offer a red polarizing perspective that you can also respond to by composing an acknowledgement statement. So here goes. Liberals say they want the federal government to provide opportunities for people on the margins, but they're hypocrites. They know that these welfare programs trap millions of people into dependency on the government. What that means is more votes for their party, and the government gets bigger and bigger. Blues want to create a society where everyone gets the same outcomes in life, no matter how much effort they put into their own success. When they talk about equality, that's what they mean. Put Blues in charge, and they will crush personal initiative and ruin the economy. What amazes me is how many Americans get duped by this liberal approach to government. All right, so having listened to what was just said by the polarizers, take a minute to finish writing down a sentence or two that acknowledges what was said by the blue polarizer, the red polarizer, or both if you want to practice twice. So I'm going to give you that minute now. Okay, so now what we're going to do is move into our breakout rooms. All right, and I want you to each take a minute to read your statement out loud and to one another and discuss why you think it shows that you've listened to and acknowledged my statement. Okay, we will you'll get a note when you're halfway through. Okay, so any questions before we go into those breakouts? Okay, all right, Martin, please go ahead and send them in. Welcome back, folks. Hopefully you had good breakout room conversations about your acknowledged responses. So let's get into it. I want to hear some acknowledged responses, and I'm going to read the blue polarizer prompt first, or just a real quick version of it. And so they say they're for small government, but they just want the rich to get richer at the expense of the poor. What amazes me is how many Americans get duped by this conservative approach to government. Who would like to share their acknowledgement response to this blue polarizer statement? Can I get some hand raises? All right, Amorance, if you could go ahead and unmute, let me know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and let me know your statement.
Sure. It's Amaranth, and people call me Ammo.
Okay.
So I wrote, I also care deeply about equity for the working poor and agree that blaming folks in poverty is unfair and an unproductive strategy. And it's unfortunate how many voters are working with limited information.
Absolutely, yeah. There's definitely a real sense that you have acknowledged what they're very concerned about. So yeah, that's I think a great acknowledgement statement. Mary, go ahead and unmute. What was your acknowledgement statement?
My acknowledgement was, I can hear how much you care about people and how important the social safety net is to you.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, you're clearly naming the values that that are important to them. So I think that's a really good approach to this. Any other comments, any other examples of acknowledgement statements that people would make in response to this polarizing statement? Okay. Anyone else? And you can try to wave your hand and get my attention if you're having trouble with the raise hand button, but okay. So since there are no other hands, I'm going to go to the conservative one, the red polarizer. Okay, so they might say, put blues in charge and they'll crush personal initiative and ruin the economy. What amazes me is how many Americans get duped by this liberal approach to government. So does anyone have a response to this red polarizer statement? An acknowledgement response to the red polarizer. Sarah, go ahead and unmute.
So mine's pretty brief, but I said, I hear you about concerns about people being stuck in a cycle of poverty and dependence.
Absolutely, yeah. The statement definitely talked about that cycle, that dependence. So it's definitely a good acknowledgement of a really a concern that they outlined. So any other acknowledgement statements that people would like to share with the group? All right. Okay. Well, I appreciate the responses that we heard. I think you folks are into the spirit of what we're trying to talk about here. And so now that we've acknowledged, let's get into the pivot skill. Okay, so let me screen share once again. So you're going to move on to pivoting because you've acknowledged what I've said. And so here's my comment that you're going to respond to with a pivot. All right. So I'm glad you agree with me about this. I'm really worried about the future of the country if those people ever get to control all of the federal government. Most of them would follow their terrible leaders off a cliff. All right. Another really polarizing statement in response to your acknowledgement. Okay. So now take a minute to look at the pivot skill in the handout and write down a pivot response word for word as you would say it. Okay, just one or two sentences. And keep in mind that when you're using the pivot, you're not commenting on the issue being discussed, right? You already did that with acknowledgement, and you're also going to be doing that with your perspective a little bit. Okay, but you want to focus on yourself as someone who's trying to discuss these matters in a different way. Okay, so let me know how you might do that. Okay, so it could, some examples could be asking permission to give a different perspective, or perhaps offering the idea that it is a bit more complex, and you have been focusing on this, but just a pivot that doesn't focus on the issue, but just gives them a warning that you want to switch the conversation. So I'm going to give you a minute now to write down your response, and go ahead. So hopefully that was enough time for you to write a pivot response. So now what you're going to do is share your pivot in your breakout with your partners, and discuss why it pivots the conversation and how you think it addresses you and your different way of thinking, of looking at things. Okay, and you can definitely, I would encourage you to have the pivot section of your participant guide in front of you. So you're gonna have 5 minutes. So Martin, please go ahead and send them into the breakouts. I hear some conversations that were, I think, continued from the breakouts, but welcome back. Hopefully those were great conversations. And Ava, I see that you've got your hand up. So if you would like to be the first one to offer a pivot statement, just as a reminder, it's not a comment on the issue, but a way to signal that you're about to comment on the issue in a different way. Okay, so Ava, what do you have for a pivot statement?
Yeah, I'm kind of plain spoken, so I basically said, I'm worried about what's going on. Nobody seems to be listening to each other.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way to pivot the conversation, that you're concerned about the nature of the conversation, right? And so you're not commenting on the issue itself, but commenting on the conversation. I think that's a good idea. You may have to kind of read the room, so to speak, in terms of how the person that you're talking to is going to react to that sort of statement, if they'll take that as a pivot. But I think that it does work. I think I do like that idea. So thanks for offering that, Ava. And so any other examples of pivot statements that people feel are a good way to kind of shift the conversation and signal that they want to approach it differently? So Shari, what do you have for us?
Nothing that you guys didn't create. I just want to say that I'm going to absolutely use I'm with you on being very concerned about what's going on. Can I throw in another perspective? I just think that's perfect. No matter, I mean, really, I couldn't improve on that.
Yeah. And so we generally structure this as, having the acknowledgement first, and then, once we acknowledge, we kind of allow them to give us a response to that acknowledgement, just to make sure that we've got, their perspective right, and that we're focusing on the values and the issues that they really care about. And then we go to the pivot. But, I think that as we've said in the previous workshop, right, a lot of these conversations are really responsive, right? So you want to be adaptive, and it can be the case that you might want to do an acknowledgement and a pivot together, right? Just like you offered, Sherry. So I think that can be a good strategy in a lot of circumstances. So I'm going to stop my screen share so we can see all see each other. Any other examples of pivot statements that people would like to offer when you're trying to shift the tone of the conversation? So Amo, go ahead and unmute. What do you have to offer us?
I said, I've been thinking a lot about this after my trip to Israel, where we talked to folks on both sides of the conflict. And we practiced what's called a Talmudic approach, holding the kernels of truth and validity of both perspectives that are in direct conflict. And in some ways, I think this thought exercise could be valuable here.
Yeah, that's a really interesting example to bring up. And I think it aligns very much with the approach that we like to take. So yeah, I think that's a good idea. Thank you. Any other thoughts on pivot statements?
You're at about 3 minutes now.
Okay, great. And one thing that I do want to emphasize is it's often a really good idea to ask permission, right? To offer what your intention is and say, can I give you a different perspective? Or make sure that the person is ready for that perspective. So okay, great. I think this was a great discussion about pivots, and I think there's a good understanding in this group of what the function of the pivot is. So now that we have pivoted, it's a good time to offer our perspective. So we're going to read through the examples in the, I suggest you read through the examples in the participant guide on perspective and get ready to write down a perspective statement to share, okay? And one thing to keep in mind is make sure you offer a perspective on the stereotyping and disdaining of all those people who support the other side, right? Not just on the topic of the size of government, right? So the most harmful polarizing is attacking the morality, the motives of those people, right? Othering, who support views that we strongly disagree with, right? So an alternative statement to stereotyping and disdaining might be, I think there's a wide range of conservative thinking about the role of government, and some of them do support social safety net. Or I know conservatives who do care deeply about the poor and others who are left behind. They do have different ways of addressing these problems, right? So those are examples that blues might use in this scenario. You can imagine, there are certainly plenty of examples that reds would use in talking about blues, right? So write down, and so let's just briefly review, because I know that some folks were not able to do the e-course. So just a quick review of the types of statements that you might use, right? They don't all think the same way, right? Attacking that stereotype very directly, right? That stereotype is not applicable broadly, right? Secondly, it's more complicated, right? All of these issues are so complex, and the nature of the human condition is complex, and we're always learning new things. And as someone brought up previously, when you put yourself into a new environment, you may find your perspective changed, right? And that indicates how complex these things are. They're coming at this from different backgrounds and experiences. Same issue, right? When you have a different set of perspectives and exposed to a different set of experiences, your perspective could change. Our side hasn't been perfect either, right? Admitting some self-reflection is always a really good idea. Always, vulnerability always brings in more connection. So we definitely encourage you to have that. And then finally, it's not useful to dismiss them, right? In a purely practical sense, right? It is, we want to connect in order to, the fact is that as human beings, we all want to be influential, right? And so, but being dismissive, being contemptuous is not being influential. There is nothing influential about making someone else feel badly about what they believe, right? So these are the categories of perspective statements that we want you to focus on. What we'd like you to do is write down a perspective statement from one or more of these categories that you see, and you're going to share your statement and discuss how you think it addresses the stereotyping, the disdaining of the other side with your partners in the breakout rooms. Again, so this is going to be your last breakout session, right? So what we're going to do is, so I'm going to bring up the chat, and I'm going to open this to everyone. And if you would like, you can exchange contact information with one another in your with your breakout partners in the breakouts. So feel free to do that. So with that, Martin, I'm gonna have you send them back into the breakouts for another 5 minutes. All right, welcome back from the breakouts once again. And so, who would like to share a perspective statement or their learnings about, what other folks' perspective statements, something they learned in the conversation? So please go ahead and raise your hand. I would love to hear a perspective statement if you would like to share that, or just love to hear about what you thought were good characteristics of a perspective statement. So does anybody have Anybody have a comment that they would like to make or a perspective statement that they would like to read? Anyone have something to add? Okay, Afshan, go ahead.
Yeah, I felt that it was important to combine it. So if somebody, and I was thinking, the recent debate at the Supreme Court with Roe versus Wade, and I'm not taking a position anyone here. So I would say it this way. I would say, I understand and I'm listening to your concerns, and I too am worried about the issue. And I see more complexity in why some people may support or oppose that idea. And it's much more of, this issue has a much more historical background than what we are currently seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Mentioning our limited perspective, our limited ability to hold, a bunch of information in our heads, and for the media to really give us the full context of the issue. So, and as you said, you kind of combined your acknowledgement with that perspective. We're going to talk in a little bit about, being that responsive and making sure that you're always going back and forth and reassuring that person that you hear their concerns. So that's great. Thanks, Afshan. Bill, go ahead and unmute yourself. What did you discuss? Did you have a statement you wanted to offer?
Sure, yeah. Somebody in our group brought up a very good example as a thought piece on how difficult this can be, and it was the Charlottesville example, and to try to consider how we would approach somebody who brings up that conversation, or the people who were the instigators, if you will, in Charlottesville. And boy, it's hard to try to find any kind of common ground for a conversation about that. I thought the phrase that you offer up, which I like, it's not useful to dismiss them, in the sense of looking at it, if you're talking with like-minded people, which I guess is what we're doing in this example, and somebody brings up a sort of the most extreme and despicable part of the other side of what's the movement on the other side, and to try to say, well, as despicable as that element is, we have to remember they're part of a larger group of Americans who may not like them as well, but have them in their alliance. And it's not useful to just dismiss 50% of the American population, because included with them is 5 or 10% that have very extreme views. Yeah. Just like on our side, whichever side that is, everybody's got that 5 or 10%. The crazy aunt or crazy uncle who we can't really defend when it comes down to a conversation. At any rate, that's what my takeaway was from that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great reflection on a lot of the themes that we think are really important. That a small group or a very high-profile person isn't necessarily representative of the group that they are associated with, and that we should leave more room, especially for people who might be curious about our own perspectives, right? And so I think that's a great way to think about it, and a great point to emphasize in your perspective statement. So thanks very much, Bill. Any last thoughts about this before we go to the next section? Any other thoughts?
You are at about 4 minutes.
Okay. All right. So yeah, let's continue to the next section, because sometimes there will be some pushback. Okay, so we're going to try to use these skills when someone pushes back in the conversation. Okay, and so let's say that you've tried to listen, acknowledge, pivot, and share your perspective, and despite your brilliant use of the skills, right, they are still saying yes, but, or wait a minute, are you defending so and so, right? What would you do in that situation? So the basic steps to think about are connect, share, and reassure. Okay, this is a structure that we use very much in Braver Angels. Connect first, and then offer your perspective, right? So connect with what they're saying by continuing to listen and acknowledge, right? We said that you really want to be responsive. Share an additional perspective, and if necessary, reassure them that you're still with them in your core political values and beliefs. All right. In order to do these, you'll need to listen carefully to what they're objecting to in your perspective. Right? Like, are you excusing bad behavior on the other side? Right? That I think Bill just gave a great example of something that people might push back about. And so you'll also need that extra skill, reassure. Right? And we'll go into that in a little bit more depth next, along with a plan for what to do if you're really getting nowhere. Okay. So let's start with reassure. When a like-minded person senses you're continuing to come back with this new perspective that you've developed, the conversation can turn into the other person thinking you're being a traitor, or you've been duped, that you're naive, right? You might hear something like, hey, are you actually defending what those people are doing? This person's worried that your non-polarizing words mean that you no longer share their values. So
Yeah, that's okay.
reassure them. So reassure them before you go further into the conversation. Let me be clear. I still believe in X, or I'm still a conservative or a liberal, right? If you do truly kind of use that sort of term for yourself, okay? And then return to a perspective statement like this one. It's just that I don't think that demonizing the other side is helping anyone, all right? And then if you've repeated your lap skills a couple of times and the other person keeps pushing back with no softening, well, it is usually best to exit the conversation gracefully or change the topic, right? If you've taken skill for bridging the divide last time, you'll recognize this is one of the skills that we teach for handling difficult moments, okay? So for example, I'm just giving you a sense of where I'm coming from. We don't have to agree. Maybe we should just move on. Or these are tough issues. I'm going to take a break and get a cup of coffee. And actually, the usefulness of breaks and just pauses in the conversation to allow us to collect our thoughts is really, I think, underappreciated by a lot of folks. So it's definitely, we encourage you to make sure you're not barreling ahead full steam with your eyes closed, right? Be responsive to the conversation, be responsive to the other person's frame of mind, your own frame of mind, right? See what you can handle. Okay, so now we're going to do a demo of responding to pushback by repeating the lap skills. And I actually I apologize, didn't quite prep this part. That there's something that I'm going to need help from one of my associates. So either Martin or Liz, did one of you have the slide deck in front of you who can help me with this demo?
I have the slide deck, and so I would be happy to be one of them. Which do you want me to be?
Okay, so if you could be associate. So okay. Yeah, slide 38.
All right.
All right. Okay, great. So sorry about Liz. My apologies for
no problem.
Not giving you a heads up on this. Okay, so but I'll be playing the blue depolarizer, and I'm going to start with a perspective statement, and Liz is going to play blue polarizer. Okay, and so this is what that would sound like. So. Liz, after taking a Braver Angels workshop, I've been trying to better understand conservatives. One thing that's helped me is reading the National Review magazine, which has thoughtful articles, along with some that trouble me. I've come to see a lot more variety in conservative thinking, some of which I find quite interesting.
I know you're fond of Braver Angels, but come on, most Reds have never read the National Review. They get their news from right-wing TV and end up misinformed and unreasonable.
So here's an acknowledgement statement. Well, I hear you that a lot more people watch right-wing TV than read a serious magazine, and that you think most conservatives are not so reasonable.
Exactly.
Okay, and now we'll get into a perspective statement. So the shift for me was starting to listen and read what thoughtful conservatives are saying. I realized that there are a lot more of them out there than I'd thought, and sometimes they make good points.
Wait a minute. Why are you defending them? Are there no differences between our side and their side? Is it all, well, just, well, there are good ideas on both sides and it doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative.
All right, so now we get into the reassure. I hear you about whether I've gone over to the dark side. Let me be clear, I am still a devoted liberal. Just that these Braver Angel experiences have made me see conservatives and their ideas as more complex and varied than I had realized.
I'm not so sure, but maybe I should check out Braver Angels.
Well, I'll let you know about the next workshop. It'd be fun to do it together. Okay, so that is a full conversation, perhaps, and it may be a little bit simplified, right? You may have to go back and forth a little bit more, from what we've seen here. But any questions about any of the skills that you heard that were used in the demo, or any observations that anyone found interesting about when the skills were used? Any thoughts, any questions? Okay. Norma, please go ahead and unmute.
Hi, thank you. So something that I found myself reacting to here in the demo, and then also when I have conversations with people, is that it seems to be an easy fallback to use what I consider to be the labels that's just so quickly capture the stereotypes that people may hold, the labels being either liberal or conservative. So that in itself, to me, minimizes the opportunity to explore that more, to explore thinking in one direction or another more. So that's what I can offer. And I try to, I push back when someone seems to want to capture me into one of those buckets, put me into one of those buckets. So that's my approach to trying to not add to this polarization. Thank you.
Yeah. And it's a really interesting issue that we have definitely heard a lot of folks who are uncomfortable with the red-blue framework that we use as an organization, right? And we often want to address this because we know that some people do find it inherently polarizing itself, right? But our organization was formed because of an inherent conflict that we saw in this country that was exacerbated by a media framing that essentially said that there are two sides to pretty much every issue, right? And there's a lot of research out there that talks about when people identify with one issue, they often identify the same way with many other issues, but especially they're often assumed to identify the same way with many other issues, right? And so, people are kind of simplifying themselves based on group identities, but we're certainly simplifying one another and our views of one another. And so we feel it's really important to acknowledge this dynamic that exists and that does paint people in oversimplified ways, right? And so that's one of the reasons why we use this framework, because when people come to our red-blue workshop, for example, every red-blue that I have moderated, someone at the end says we are a lot closer to one another than I thought, right? And their stereotypes get exploded, basically. They realize that even though I can still call someone a conservative or call them a liberal or progressive, libertarian, whatever labels that we apply to ourselves or others to try to make sense of our kind of political world, because we do need terms that help to clarify, some of our perspectives. But whatever labels we're applying to one another are not, they don't universally describe everything that we believe, right? And it's really important that we understand that. And so when we're willing to be in a conversation, a full conversation, where we're willing to be responsive and curious about that other person's perspective, that's the kinds of interactions that we are really trying to encourage. So thank you, Norma. I appreciate the thought about that, and I appreciate the interest in in really understanding this dynamic and trying to impact it. Sarah, did you have something to add?
Real briefly, just to your point, every year we break out sessions with our members, and school board members across the state. And this one fellow, big cowboy hat and suspenders and all the rest, started talking about CBD oils and their value in helping his grandson deal with autism or something, and this guy didn't scream to me to be the type that would support drugs, but the next day he then talked about, we had a conversation about guns in schools, and he was all for, oh, heck yeah, we got to have guns in schools. But he lives up, in the northern third of the state. And as he explained, it takes 2 hours for any first responders to get there. That's not a Los Angeles perspective, but, to your back, as you were saying, people can hold different values. They're not monolithic, so.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah.
Suspenders meant nothing except his pants wouldn't fall down.
I love it. Thank you. All right, great. Well, yeah, I appreciate those thoughts, and we actually have some final thoughts on really the long-term approach to this strategy of trying to understand one another and each other's perspectives, especially those folks who are on our side, and really trying to relate to them and focus on the complexities of these issues. So I want to share how we can be depolarizers in our lives. Okay. So first of all, being a depolarizer is not just being high-minded. Okay. It is about being pragmatic about the future, right? Many of our differences today have been around in some form since the founding of the country, and they're not going to disappear. All right. And our current whipsaw approach to polarized policymaking leads to undoing each side's policies every 4 to 8 years, right? So the result is paralysis, cynicism about government, which you folks know better than anyone, right? How cynicism can really affect your roles and affect the working of our country, right? So quoting a Braver Angels workshop participant, neither side is going to vanquish the other. So we better figure out how to get along and run the country together. And your polarizing influence in your social circles is apt to occur over time, not necessarily in any individual conversation or with every individual, right? If you come across as genuine and use your skills, people are going to remember what you said and think about it, right? So a long-term goal could be I'm getting ahead of myself, could be to explain the other side's views in such a way that they would say, you got it. Okay, this requires reading, listening, and suspending disbelief long enough to understand the worldviews and policy views of people you differ with, right? That's why it's a long-term goal for those who decide to embrace it. And, value the other part of yourself. If you really want to take a road less traveled, practice identifying your inner conservative side if you're a liberal, or your inner liberal side if you're a conservative. Make sure that you see these as positive aspects of you. For example, the committed traditionalist in some areas for a liberal, or the openness to rapid change for conservative, right? The lesson that we think is important, the other resides in me as part of what I value about myself. So now I just want to ask, what are you taking away from our work today? And I'd love to hear from a few different people about what you got out of this workshop. And so go ahead and raise your hand, and we will call on you. So Sherry, go ahead. What are you taking away from this session today?
For me, as a policy writer, I find this is going to be super helpful when dealing with opposing views at like public comment. I think it's going to really, not only does this address obviously political divides, but I think really any kind of divide, whether it's about short-term rentals or a gas station ban or whatever. I really think these tools are going to help me lead a more productive discussion to create policy. So thank you very much.
Excellent. I'm so happy to hear that, Sherry. And we actually have, as part of our Braver Politics program, we have public meeting formats that we are able to offer the elected officials and the public officials that we work with. So we'll have a few more words about that at the end, but look out for that. Norma, go ahead and unmute. What are you taking away from today?
Oh, I'll echo what was just said. Even in committee work, where the committee members don't necessarily use obvious polarizing terminology or words, but we do disagree. The perspectives are varied, and we have to come away still recognizing that we will hold those perspectives and yet try to keep whatever the goal is among us. So we're whether we connect or not. And to what degree, really, in that committee work isn't necessarily the goal, but to get the work done without enhancing or creating animosity to keep us from reaching that is what I think is the work. And so the skills to be learned and practiced again and again certainly will keep me busier. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I am so grateful to hear that you folks feel that these skills are going to be applicable to your work. I mean, obviously, that is why we are partnering with ILG, and we really are excited to continue to bring you these programs. And actually, the next program is one called Managing Difficult Conversations with Constituents and Colleagues. And so it'll go even deeper into those skill sets that the two of you have just mentioned. So that's fantastic to hear. So any other last comments about what you're taking away? And Erica, if you want to go ahead and take over.
Yeah, and Randy actually teed it up perfectly. We do have another session coming up, Managing Difficult Conversations with Constituents and Colleagues. Super excited to do that session with this group, and hopefully you can gain those listening, speaking skills to really deal with those constituents, those colleagues that you might be disagreeing with. One of the most common questions we've been getting for the last couple of months and maybe even years now, how do we diffuse those tense and frustrating interactions? We hope you'll join us in July. Next slide, please. We also have another session that we've been doing around expanding cultural intelligence, and we are so excited to be partnering with another agency on that. It's really about moving beyond that cultural awareness and political correctness into something that's really about cultural intelligence, understanding how to relate to people that are different than you, and especially kind of tackling that complicated terminology around equity, right? What kinds of the diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging conversations can you have in your local agency? How do you operationalize that? That's what this session is, and it's going to tie in really nicely with the Braver Angels session on managing, having difficult conversations, managing conflict through the lens of equity. So those go work hand in hand, and it'll be a great pair up. So we do hope that you'll connect on those. And then please, if you don't already work with us and partner with us and join in our newsletters and our social handles, these are there. That's the fastest way for you to find out what our sessions are and when they're having them and how you can stay connected to what's coming up in our training calendars.
We want to thank Erica and the team at ILG for bringing this group together, and also mention Braver Politics, because that's the initiative that this workshop is part of. So you can find out more information at braverpolitics.org. We are looking to sign up as many citizens, public officials as possible. So we'd love each of you to sign up for Braver Politics if you haven't yet. Spread the word to the people in your life who may be interested, because they can get some of the public officials, the elected officials, even staff members, folks like that in their communities, who to sign up for this initiative and really have an impact on as many communities around the country as possible. And of course, we've got more ILG events coming. And then we would love for you to join Braver Angels, our organization. There's so much more than just Braver Politics. These skills are broadly applicable in so many areas of our lives. We've got workshops, we've got debates, we have local alliances, which allow us to come together on a regular basis and with a standing group and talk about the issues that are impacting our communities and what we can do about them together. And of course, we have training for roles like mine, a moderator, the Zoom event managers like Martin and Liz, who are so instrumental to doing this work. You can get trained to do that stuff. So we're very excited. We're putting a few links in the chat. And then finally, we'll mention that the recording and e-learning module are going to be available for you folks on a sustained basis. We're going to be editing the recording. So it'll take a little bit of time to get you that. but that will be available. We want you to use that. We want you to lean into it and really focus on these skills. I've been focusing on these skills for 5 years, and I'm still working through it. I'm still learning new things every day. And so it's really a long-term project, as we said. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. Erica, any final words that you'd like to add?
Just gratitude for joining us today, gratitude for the work that you're doing in your communities, gratitude for acknowledging that there is so much difficulty right now as we're trying to bridge divides amongst our communities, amongst our colleagues, even amongst our family members, and you are taking such an important step to doing that. So we thank you. We are grateful for you. And on behalf of ILG and Braver Angels, have a great rest of your week.